Muslims aren't a race, so I can't be racist, right? Wrong. By Craig Considine. Yes, we are looking at an article from the, as you might have guessed from the little advert at the bottom that says, "We're so huffing excited." We are looking at an article from the Huffington Post, the American version, obviously, of the Huffington Post. And I'm afraid, before we continue, I have to point out we can't get rid of that little advert at the bottom that says, "We're so huffing excited. Check out the new front page." Because if you actually click on the advert, obviously it will take you to the front page, but if you click on the X, which you would assume would close it, it still takes you to the front page. It still does. So we're going to scroll up and find out how we can be racist when we're not actually criticizing someone's race, okay? So we're going to scroll up. Actually, we're going to stop for a minute. Can you figure out what the hell is actually happening in that picture? Right? Because everybody's smiling, okay? And she's smiling. And if you look, she's heading towards what appears to be platefuls of food, okay? Now, is it just me, or does it actually look like, maybe they've all kidnapped this poor little innocent Muslim woman, and they're all smiling, going, "Ha, you haven't had food for weeks and weeks. Look, here is a plate of food, but you must get through everybody to get to the food. If you win and get to the food on the table, you will be the winner, and you will have some food." Or something stupid like that. I don't know, it does look like she's trying to, if you look right, on the right-hand side, there's like a chap there who's going to grab for some food, and you can see her hand is pushing against the guy, pushing him out of the way, almost trying to grab his hand and push it out of the way. And you look on the other side of her, right, and there's a woman whose hand is also going towards some food and is actually trying to grab at some food. So both the people whose hands she is touching the hands of are actually trying to grab some food. It does look like she's trying to push them out of the way, doesn't she? Anyway, just a side note, it does look like she's trying to push two people out of the way to get at some food. I'm not sure what the heck was happening when they took that picture, but they all seem happy, so what do I know? But it does look like she's pushing people out of the way to try and get some, I don't know, maybe she's trying to get seconds or something, I don't know. Anyway, let's scroll this up and be serious and read how we can be racist against a group that's not actually a race. Come on. Nonsense. That is what people say when I accuse them of being racist. Their argument goes something like this. Muslims are not even a race, so how the hell could I be... Muslims are not even a race, so how the hell could I even be racist? You're an idiot. Do you know what, Craig? I think they actually know you very well. Maybe you should actually listen to them. Take a little bit of friendly advice. No? Okay, we'll carry on then. But they do have a point. You can't actually be racist against a group of people that aren't a race. But I'm sure you're going to explain to us how we can, so we're going to carry on and listen to what you say. Because Muslims are not a race, people believe that any type of violence or oppression directed towards them cannot be racially? I can English, honestly. I can't. Give me a second chance, please. Please read that sentence again. I can English. Yeah, because Muslims are not a race, people believe that any type of violence or oppression directed towards them cannot be racially motivated. And they'd be right. That this form of hatred, known as Islamophobia, dun 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 dun, the deadly, serious I word, Islamophobia. Yes, this form of hatred, known as Islamophobia, cannot be racism. Well, actually, first of all, it can't be racism. Islamophobia is the stupidest phobia in the world. It is actually the stupidest phobia in the world. I mean, come on. Islamophobia is the term used. You're called an Islamophobe if you criticize anything about Islam, okay? Even if you just say it's a misogynistic religion, you are Islamophobic. If you say it's a bit stuck in its way, it needs a referendum. If you say it's a bit stuck in its way and it needs reforming, like Christianity had a reformation, for example, you're an Islamophobe. If you say that Islam, and actually, if you do read the Quran, you will find this is true. But if you actually read the Quran, and you will find for a fact that Islam does treat women as inferior, it really does. Read the Quran. I have read quite a lot of the Quran. Not all of it. I have read a lot of the Quran, though. Okay, so I do know some of what I'm talking about. Okay, and women are worth they're basically inferior to men. Okay, that's just a fact. Any Muslim watching this I'm sure will admit that. Well, actually, they probably wouldn't. But anyway, I digress, right? The point is, Islamophobia is the dumbest religion. Islamophobia is the, I'm sorry, Freudian slip. It's not the dumbest religion in the world, but it's one of the most dangerous. No, seriously. Islamophobia is the dumbest phobia you can get, okay? It's not even a real phobia, okay? Because a phobia is where you are afraid of something. So, I'm trying to think of a phobia. You take arachnophobia, right? It's a fear of spiders, okay? A phobia is a fear of something. So if you are afraid of something, you avoid the thing that makes you frightened, okay? So in the case of arachnophobia, you would avoid spiders. In the case of a fear of heights, you would avoid anything high. You would avoid high places. And if you're frightened of tight spaces, you would avoid tight spaces, okay? So why is it that Islamophobia is the only phobia I know of at all, ever, although I don't agree that it's a real phobia, I'm just saying, it's the only phobia where people seem to seek out the thing they're afraid of and actively confront it. Because Islamophobia is only labelled at people that are criticising in some way Muslims. You're only called an Islamophobe if you criticise something to do with Islam. If Islam really scared you, and you had a real phobia of anything to do with Islam, you'd be walking down the streets and every time you saw somebody wearing a hijab or a guy with a big long beard, you'd go, where's my EpiPen? Or whatever. It just doesn't happen. It is not a real bloody phobia. But anyway, I digress. First, let me be clear. It is true that Muslims are not a race. The word Muslim itself connects to followers of Islam, a world religion, not a race. Well done. Job done. We go home now. Oh, no, of course, you've got another half an article to read. It's never this easy, is it? Not with social justice. Okay. How many times are you going to admit that Islam isn't a race and then say we can be racist against it? Even though it's not a race. Let's find out. Muslims are a diverse religious grouping and, in fact, one of the most heterogeneous populations in the world. In the world. In theory, I don't know why I said it like that. In theory, the Ummah... I'll try and be serious. In theory, the Ummah, or global Muslim community, is made up of many races. Moreover, not all Muslims are simply born Muslim. Like people are born black or white, or should I say, white or black. Like people are born white or black. Muslim identity is something that one can acquire through conversion. In this sense, Muslim identity is nurtured and not natured. Since I am focusing on the subject of identity and race, let me extend this discussion to other social groupings. Yep, let's scroll up and find out what happens. If Muslims are not a race, then which group is? Some people might immediately point to black people and say, that's definitely a race, look at their skin colour. But, to be exact, black people are not a race either. Neither, for that matter, are white people. Okay, now you might wonder about Jewish people. Certainly they are a race, right? Science proves they, like whites and blacks, are not a race either. And what about Asians? Are they a race? Nope, Asians are not a race. The indigenous people of America. This is where you know for a fact that this person is a social justice warrior, because they would rather say the indigenous people of America than say American Indians. Never mind. The indigenous people of America. A race? Nope, not a race. You see, there is no such thing as race or races, traditionally understood. Scientists long ago proved that race is not is not a biological reality, but a myth, a socially constructed concept. Okay, let me explain something. First of all, a socially constructed concept is not a myth. It is something real that we have constructed an identity for. How do I explain this well? Okay, let's take race. Okay, race, yes, it is basically in your terms, I would suppose you would say it is a socially constructed concept. But it is a real thing, okay? People really are black or white, Chinese, etc., whatever. Okay, black, white, Asian, etc. That really is a thing, okay? People really do have, different skin colours, okay? So the socially constructed concept that you talk about of race is not a myth. It is just a word we used to describe an actual thing. It's how we categorize some people. It might be wrong, but it's how we do it. So it is a real thing, okay? Anyway. Yet, despite the data, human beings have been programmed to associate specific things to certain radical groups. Things like intelligence, work ethic, family values, and behavior. As such, we have been brainwashed to think that some groups are inherently better than others, and that the white race, to be frank, is better than all. Nope, I've never been told the white race is better than all. Not at all. Maybe you have. I don't know. But never mind, let's carry on. Race, as one of my favourite sociologists, the late and great Stuart Hall. No, before anyone asks, I don't think that he means the one that did It's a Knockout and was accused of being a paedophile. Pretty sure he doesn't mean that one. Shh. Okay, no, he doesn't mean that one. I'm just being sarcastic. Okay. Race, as one of my favourite sociologists, the late and great Stuart Hall, put it, is a floating signifier, meaning that it is a fluid concept. No, race is not a fluid concept, which has specific connotations during certain moments in history. Races, in short, have never been exclusively biologically determined, but rather politically constructed by powerful people, usually dominant groups in societies. I'm pretty sure that black people have always been black people, white people have always been white people. I'm pretty sure that that's been a thing for pretty much forever, basically. According to Hall, there is a new type of racism. You can't have a new type of racism. Cultural racism. No. You don't get to take words and then completely change them. You started this article, and your whole thrust of this article is supposed to be that we can be racist against Islam because even though it's not a race, somehow we can be racist. Now you're saying that we can only be racist if we redefine racism as having subsections of racism. So there's racism, which is racism against people, and then there's cultural racism, which is racism against the culture. You can't be racist against the fucking culture. There is not a new type of racism. You might want there to be a new type of racism so you can have more bloody buzzwords to fling at everybody when you're accusing people of being whatever it is they are next. But no, there is not a new type of racism. Okay? Cultural racism is not a thing just because you want to make it so. I'm quite triggered by that now. Very triggered indeed. I shall have to read that again. According to Hall, there is a new type of racism, cultural racism, which is my focus here. So not racism then. Racism is no longer about race, skin colour, but culture. No, fucktard. Racism is and always has been about race, skin colour. What you should have written is racism is still about race, skin colour, and not culture. Never mind, let's carry on reading your lovely articles, very well worded. People are othered and discriminated against not simply because of the colour of their skin or other phenotypes, but because of their beliefs and practices associated with some imagined culture. So what you're saying now, because you're talking about this in the context of Muslims and Islamophobia, are you trying to argue that Islam is an imagined culture? Because anybody that reads the Quran can quite easily tell you what the hell the culture is because it's written down in the Quran. Go and read it. Oh wait, come back when you've read it. Cultural racism therefore happens when certain people perceive their beliefs and customs as being culturally superior to the beliefs and customs of other groups of people. Well, by your argument then, if that's what you're saying cultural racism is, even though it's not actually a thing, then Islam is definitely culturally racist against every other fucking culture on the entire earth. Because if you actually read the Quran, and I have read the Quran, you will find that the whole point of Islam is to make everybody else into a Muslim. That's the whole point, to put their culture, as you call it, and make their culture the only culture. So what you're saying, and before anyone asks, I know there are situations where you can stay as a non-believing Muslim as long as you pay the jizya. Okay, I know that, but even then you are subservient. Okay, so you are not as good as the Muslims. You're tolerated. Okay, so by any argument that you would like to make, the Quran does teach that no culture is as good as the Muslim culture, and the Muslim culture should be the only one, and that any others that are allowed to exist by the kindness of Allah have to exist as subservient and not as good, second place basically, to the dominant culture of Islam. So yes, by your own argument, cultural racism, even if it were real cultural racism, well, Islam would be the most culturally racist culture that you could get. So if we use your argument, you've kind of lost the argument already. But never mind, we shall carry on. Cultural racism, in turn, reproduces the idea of the hierarchy of cultures, meaning in the context of current affairs that our Western culture is superior to their Islamic culture. This way of thinking is problematic because it essentializes diverse classifications like Westerners and Muslims. It creates a binary of Western equals civilized and Islamic equals uncivilized. Okay, you do realize that a culture that teaches that people should have their hands chopped off for thieving and women should be executed and people should be executed, not all women obviously, women that do certain crimes should be executed, but specifically that people that blaspheme against Allah, for example, should be executed. You do realize a culture like that might be seen as a little teensy bit uncivilized in the West. You can understand that, yeah? Just curious, that's all. Bobby Said, another favourite thinker of mine, argues that Islamophobia is undoubtedly a form of racism. Again, it is not a race, therefore it is not racist, and even by your own definition, which you redefined racism as being cultural racism, it still wouldn't be racist because Islam would have to therefore be considered more culturally racist than the West, because the West tolerates and integrates with other cultures and allows them to integrate with our culture, whereas Islam really doesn't. Okay? But never mind, let's continue. You're really not very good at arguing your point here. I know I'm not very good at explaining mine, but you're not very good at arguing yours either. He regards it as a type of racism that takes up the white man's burden for the new American century. It is a humanitarian intervention, not a mission civilisatrix. Islamophobia only wants to spread democracy, not to expropriate resources. It does not want to exterminate ignoble savages, only to domesticate unruly Muslims. In this context, the US invasion of Iraq and Afghanistan can be treated as wars driven by cultural racism. A term that does not exist, but never mind. Bush wanted to spread democracy and liberate Muslims, particularly women, among other things. I think you could have phrased that a little bit better, because the way it was actually written, it sounded like you might be hinting that women are things, because you actually said Bush wanted to spread democracy and liberate Muslims, particularly women, among other things. It could be taken that way, but never mind. I know what you really meant. Don't worry. I don't really know what you meant, but I think I understand what you actually meant to write it as. Never mind. Let's carry on. I keep saying that, don't I? I should stop interrupting. No, I shan't. Anyway, Muslims, he theorized, were incapable of developing these culturally superior ways of life on their own, so they must be molded and trained to be more like us, the civilized people. If racism represents systemic oppression based upon preconceived notions or stereotypes of particular social groups, then the US government is most definitely guilty of racism. To be specific, cultural racism, which doesn't exist. As we keep saying, it doesn't exist. You can't redefine racism to say it's not about race, or maybe it's sometimes about race when we want it to be about race, but it's also about cultures. You can be culturally racist. No, you can't. No, you can't. I'm sorry, you can't be culturally racist. You've lost your argument, but let's scroll up and continue. Said makes another point that is worth mentioning. He states that Muslims are depicted in public discourse as arch-villains. Really? Okay. If we're talking about the Western media here, okay, which is public discourse in a sense, right? If you're talking about what people see every day of their lives, can you show me anywhere in the public media, like TV programs, anything like that, newspapers, etc., can you show me any situations, okay, where Muslims are shown as arch-villains? Can you do that? I'm not talking about a few articles in the Daily Express or something, okay? For your point to be a valid argument, if you're saying that they are depicted in public discourse as arch-villains, that would have to mean that most of the time they would be presented as that, not just occasionally in some stupid article in a newspaper, okay? So, can you show me that more often than not Muslims are depicted as arch-villains? I'll give you a clue. You can't, because it's complete bollocks, okay? It's just absolute total fucking bollocks. Excuse my language, but it is. An idea which produces all sorts of racist anxieties in the minds of non-Muslims. Yet, despite the obvious connections between racism and anti-Muslim sentiment, Islamophobia has been presented as nothing as sordid as racism, but rather a rational response to real threats to Western, nay universal values, as he puts it. Let me be clear here. There is nothing rational about Islamophobia. Treating Muslims poorly because they are Muslim is racism. It is that simple. No, it's not. Racism is against a race of people, not a religion. It's not as simple as you're trying to make out, because racism cannot be directed against Muslims because they're not a race. Okay, racism can be directed against black people or white people, for example, but it can't be directed against Islam, Judaism, Christianity, Buddhism, Sikhism, etc. Okay? So actually, yeah, it is that simple. If someone gives a Muslim woman, you wrote that as women, and I read it the way it should be said, which is if someone gives a Muslim woman, and you wrote it completely wrong and wrote, if someone gives a Muslim a women, okay, I think you meant the singular, not the plural. I will read it as having the singular. If someone gives a Muslim woman wearing the hijab a dirty look, sorry, but you are racist. Again, no, they really fucking aren't. If someone assaults a Muslim woman wearing the hijab, which has recently happened in Toronto, well, actually, if it's the one I'm thinking of, it turned out to be an actually fake hate crime. But I could be wrong. It might be a different one you're on about. But anyway, never mind. Yeah, you are a racist. No, they're not. They're just a knobhead. Time to face the music. Nope. They're just a dickhead. Need more proof that Islamophobia is a form of cultural racism? Actually, any proof would be very interesting at this point in time, because so far you haven't managed to prove a single fucking thing you've said. Okay, first of all, you're just redefining racism as cultural racism. You're redefining racism as cultural racism, so you're trying to redefine words to fit your argument, and even then, you don't actually provide any proof that it exists. But never mind, yeah, let's carry on. Consider the experience of Inderjit Singh Mukher. Mukher was assaulted in September 2015 for looking Muslim. He was dragged out of his car and beaten to a pulp by a man screaming, "You're a terrorist, Bin Laden." The twist here, dun 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 dun, is that Mukher is not even Muslim. Dun 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 dun. He is Sikh. Well, I hope he gets better soon. The perpetrator of this sorry, I'm just being stupid. The perpetrator of this crime looked at Mukher's turban and thought, "He's a Muslim. He's dangerous." A cultural symbol in this case was used as a signifier to judge an entire group of people, however wrongly. Is this racism? Most definitely. Allow me to correct that, you missed a word out there. Is this racism? Most definitely not. Even Sikhs suffer from Islamophobia. Ultimately, the issue here is racism without race, as sociologist Eduardo Bonilla Silva calls it. The more we assume that race is limited to skin color, which it is, the less we understand about contemporary racism faced by Muslims at home and abroad. Because it's not racism. Now is the time to teach youth that racism is much more than the white-black dichotomy. Racism is changing in its form. No, it's not changing in its form. Racism is still racism. It's still fucking stupid to treat somebody different whether they're black or white, but it's still fucking racism. It's not changing. Okay, racism is changing in its form, but the beast is still very much alive and well. Okay, first of all, racism is not changing in its form. People have always been racist, and people always will be racist. Okay? You're never gonna get rid of racism, much as people would like it to be gone. It's always going to exist. You're always going to find plenty of people of any skin colour that are racist against people of every other skin colour, because for whatever reason they think they are superior to every other skin colour, okay? Every other race. And yes, the beast is still very much alive and well, but it's not changing in its form. So, Craig Considine, I hope you're huffing excited as well, because you're basically completely fucking up your own argument, okay? Because Islamophobia is the dumbest phobia in the world because it seems to be the only phobia where you confront the thing and challenge the thing that actually is supposed to frighten the shit out of you. Okay, second of all, I've never actually seen somebody suffering from genuine Islamophobia because if you go down the streets of London, Cardiff, anywhere like that where there's quite a few Muslims, I don't think I've ever seen anybody walking past a Muslim lady in a burqa and going, mommy, 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 I need a cuddle, I need a cuddle, I'm scared, get rid of the poor Muslim person for me, please, please, I'm scared. It doesn't work like that, okay? It just doesn't fucking work like that, okay? It's the dumbest fucking phobia in the world, okay? Second of all, you started the article by saying that you can be racist against Muslims even though Islam is not a race, it's a religion. And then you proceeded to admit several times, if I recall correctly, yes, you proceeded to admit that Islam is not a race, Muslim is not a race, and that the only way you can be racist is if you redefine the term racism to include cultural racism, I can English. The only way you can be racist is to change the term and call it cultural racism, and then you're racist against the culture. Except you're missing the point. It's a religious and a political ideology where women are treated a hell of a lot less beneficially than men, and a lot of people do criticize that, myself included, okay? Women are treated as inferior to men in Islam, and there's some other stuff in Islam that is pretty damn shitty as well, but that's why we criticize it, okay? We don't turn around and say we don't want Muslims anywhere at all. We don't say go out and kill the Muslims or anything like that. We don't have a phobia of Muslims at all. We just don't like certain things about the religion and the political ideology. But by your definition, we are all culturally racist. And of course, because we have to introduce that new buzzword, culturally racist, we also have to remember you're a complete fucktard. Good night.